Right. Hello, everyone. Today is March 7th. My name is Urlin Vasilov, and I'm the community manager for Velero. That's official community meeting, so please follow the code of conduct and just be nice to each other. I've added the link to our community meetings into the chat. So please add yourself, add your topics, and updates or whatever you want to have for discussion. I can see that's done from many folks already. Thank you very much. So with that, I can see that Anshul added few, Scott, and then Shubham. So I'll go the same way. So Anshul, do you want to share or should I share and we can go through the PRs or?
Maybe you can share. I have some issues sharing through Zoom.
Sure. Give me a sec. Okay. So
yeah,
yeah,
so
go
I'll
ahead.
basically briefly talk about both of these PRs and basically try to see what discussion we need in this forum. So this PR I raised for providing a support for multiple snapshot class selection through the CSI plugin. And Scott and Shubhav have already gone through the PR, and I think we are at an overall consensus. And I see that Daniel also joined today, so I was hoping that like we can use this forum to kind of come to a consensus as to what makes sense, does not make sense. So maybe I'll quickly take a minute to explain what all approaches we thought through and what we kind of landed on, so that we can take the conversation from there. So basically, there are three approaches, right? As of today, the volume snapshot class is selected by a label on a volume snapshot class for a particular driver. It is more of a global behavior where you can't really say that for this backup use this volume snapshot class or for this schedule use this specific one. So that was a problem at hand. And there are three solutions. One solution is we send this particular information. We want to say for this backup and driver, use this volume snapshot class. We either send that information as an annotation in the backup CR, or second is we introduce a new parameter in the backup CR, which is specifically for CSI related fields. And the third approach that I've proposed and kind of have been pushing for is a plugin inputs approach, which is a generic approach and kind of accrues to all plugins which want to send any specific parameters for a specific backup or restore. The second approach for backup CR, I believe Shubham and Scott were also kind of against introducing CSI specific params in the backup CR. And the annotations route is a very user unfriendly route in my opinion. So that is kind of what I also don't want to have. So on the third approach that I have proposed, the plugin inputs approach, I think that Daniel had some comments. So I mean, maybe we can try to get some consensus amongst folks here. So go ahead, Daniel.
Yes, I understand that requirement. That's a valid one. So I think the major disagreement, per my understanding, is whether it should be the plugin input or it should be in the backup CR spec. I personally don't like very much the plugin inputs. I don't think we want to expose the detail of plugin to the user who write the backup CR spec. That's my personal opinion. I haven't had a chance to discuss with other developer in China, but yeah.
I was going to say another thing that we need to keep in mind here too is that I think the other thing we want to try to avoid is to build into Velero core code any knowledge of something that's in a plugin, because the idea is that I ought to be able to change a plugin without needing to change Velero core. So for example, if if you change the way you register a plugin, or if you change the API for a plugin, that's not the API, but like the inputs of a plugin, that shouldn't require Velero changes. So the generic approach kind of says, does at least avoids that. It decouples it from Velero's internal design, so you don't have to coordinate those changes. It also allows third-party plugins, vendor plugins, to use the same mechanism, because we're obviously not going to be building in spec field changes, specific to a Dell plugin or a Red Hat plugin or an IBM plugin in the spec. So building out this, I know for a long time we've had this issue, and the only answer so far has been write annotations. And I actually think annotations are better than modifying the spec, because at least the annotations don't hard code plug in specific things that aren't in Velero core in the Velero core code. So I think if we're not going to do the approach where we have the plugin inputs, I actually think the existing annotation approach is probably cleaner than a custom field in the Velero backup CR spec for a plugin that's not in the core repo, because I think that's too tightly coupled.
Yeah, just share some of my thoughts around that. Thanks for the information, Scott. That makes sense. But I would like to point out that the CSI plugin is a little bit special because that's a very generic plugin. We don't want to change Velero spec for plugin because the plugin is often vendor specific. We don't want to put vendor specific information in the spec, but CSI is not something like
I mean, that's true. It is a different case. I guess another question I would have relating to this design, and the answer maybe we don't want to worry about that here, is if you're talking about a plugin that's not CSI plugin, do we want to just continue to say the best way for Red Hat or for our Dell to handle plugin inputs is to use annotations, or do we want to build some kind of mechanism into the spec to allow that to be explicit? And if we don't have to do that as part of this, if we decide that the CSI is a special case and it doesn't need to be here, but I think it could be if we decided that we liked, for example, the plugin inputs and we wanted to treat CSI, that would allow us to treat CSI in the same way. But it may be that we want to go ahead and treat CSI as a special case because almost everybody going forward is going to be using CSI plugin, even though it's implemented as a plugin. We're essentially developing it as core functionality. So I do see that we could make an exception there. It's just a question of whether we think it's cleaner to treat it the same way as the other plugins, or whether we want to actually make the special case here.
Yeah, I think my personal least favorite is the plugin inputs. I think we may have a separate discussion regarding plugin inputs, whether it's needed. I personally don't want to expose that to the end user. So as for CSI, I think either using annotation or a backup spec sounds okay to me at the moment. I'm not sure why Andrew mentioned that annotations approach has been decided as a bad one, or
no, I don't think it's bad necessarily. I think it's the best that we can do right now. I just think that I've seen some people have said that annotations just kind of a second best thing, that having an explicit support for that might make more sense. I don't think annotations is bad. I think it's kind of the best we can do here. I don't know that it's ideal. As far as exposing the plugin inputs to the user, you're exposing them either way, because even if you do this approach, the plugin has to publish, hey, I'm looking for this annotation. Now, the advantage of the annotation approach is you don't have to worry about how the plugin was registered, what name was used, because there is a risk if that name changes, between a V2 and a V3, they might use a different name to register the plugin, and the user's old CRs wouldn't work anymore. So that is a risk of this approach, probably.
Right.
I mean, my own opinion is, I think annotations is kind of my second favorite as well. It's just that, I think my first and third are the reverse of yours. So doing annotations is kind of a compromise that I think everyone here that I've heard talk about it says, okay, not my favorite, but it works. That would also be the easiest to implement because it wouldn't require any changes to the Velero core code. Because the user would just put the annotation on the backup CR, and the plugin would just read the annotation, and there would be no needed changes to Velero spec or the API.
Thought to add, right? So even in BSLs today, right, if you really see it's just a property bag. The user has to go and figure out if it is what kind of a storage provider it is, provide the same correct plugin name. If it's Azure or if AWS, you need to provide the correct name, and then it's a generic property bag, right? I don't really understand how this is different from that design. It's the exact same method, right? You specify the plugin name, you give it a generic property bag. That's the exact thing I'm doing here. Instead of we are just kind of we just have no other way to do it through another CR.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's right. I mean, I think this is the kind of same approach that we are taking with the object store plugins.
okay.
But I guess the only difference, because when I first looked at this PR, I was thinking that was kind of similar too. The only difference really is that actually goes on the backup storage location, and this is and this would be going on the backup CR or the restore CR. I don't know that that's a significant difference, but that is the one example where we give plugin specific inputs to plugins, not using annotations. And I think so. I mean, I actually think it's a good idea. Whether it's essential here, whether this is the use case that would drive us to do that or not, because we're already using annotation outside of object store. The only way backup and restore plugins are getting inputs is annotations, and we're already using that, anyway. So it might make sense to, I mean, from an ease of implementation, to just do the same thing here, and treat this as a separate proposal, not connected to a specific plugin, saying, okay, we want to propose a generic way of getting plugin inputs. Let's propose it, let's implement it, and then plugins can later, modify their APIs to use that instead of annotations. So that would be another way of doing this. I don't personally object to this proposal, but I also don't object to the annotations one. That's kind of where I'm saying that I like the property approach better, but I do prefer annotations to modifying the spec in a CSI specific way. That's just my opinion on this.
But
I don't know if anyone else on the call has a view, Shubham or anyone else.
The issue with annotations is how many annotations will you end up adding, right? Today it's CSI, let's say we take an exception. Tomorrow anyone needs to develop any of their own plugins, right? It's just bloating up annotations, and it's not in any structured manner. You can make mistakes very easily, and like I don't know.
I don't consider it a very sorry to interrupt, but I don't consider it a very generic requirement that we need to allow user to add some plugin inputs in their backup. I think that's something we need to discuss and decide. I don't think that's a very generic requirement for that.
I think it's, I would say that we already have plugins with that requirement. It's just that right now, in the absence of any support from Velero itself, annotations always work because that's a Kubernetes feature that Velero doesn't get involved in. So I know on the Red Hat side, we have several plugins that have taken annotations on the backup CR to as plugin inputs, because that was the only way we could do it, because there wasn't any kind of map or properties field or whatever. And if we had that available, we probably would have used it. But in the absence of that, we use annotations. At some level, it's an implementation detail, but obviously it goes into the API. Either way, you've got some map on the backup that you pull things out of, because the annotations themselves are a map. Key value pairs are there. The only difference would be if you made this plugin specific, then the plugins would be limited to getting their own data, whereas annotations, you're essentially exposing to every plugin, which isn't, I mean, as long as you're not doing anything sensitive here, it's not a problem. It's just, I think the property approach is a little cleaner because it gives the plugin just what they want versus telling the plugin, look at the backup CR, grab the annotations and look for the ones that, the other disadvantage of annotations is it's possible for two plugins to define, the plugins have to define their own namespacing so that the annotation names don't clash. That's kind of putting responsibility on plugin owners to not clash with other plugins. Whereas if you had the map approach, you couldn't clash because each plugin has its own set of inputs. So, but I would say, to me, this feels like a longer term design question for plugin inputs that doesn't need to be tied to a specific plugin requirement. I think it's a discussion worth having, and I would actually favor implementing it. But at the same time, if the CSI, feature here is needed, I think we delay implementation of that feature discussing this. If maybe it makes sense to just do the annotations first and migrate to a longer term, more sustainable approach once we can agree on something that is generic enough, but is also it feels like it's sustainable for maintenance and all that.
That sounds good to me because I'm still not quite convinced. I get the idea that you may want to customize the behavior of plugins through some input. And
Yeah.
how do you do that? You want to introduce plugin input. But my concern is that we are exposing too much implementation detail to users who
Yeah.
are calling Velero's API. So that's something we need to debate or
I
need
guess
more time.
Yeah, I guess my response to that is that we're already doing that. It's just that we're doing that via annotations now because Velero doesn't provide, a map of inputs for a plugin. So plugin writers, and myself included, when I've written plugins in the past, have used the annotations feature of Kubernetes as a makeshift substitute for plugin inputs. And so we're still exposing just as much to the user with annotations. It's just that the plugin has to manage it, on its own, and we have to make sure that we create names for these annotations that don't clash with anything. And so, I'm just saying we're still exposed. But again, I think what I don't want to see here is us to get bogged down into this discussion and not get the CSI feature implemented that someone needs right now.
Yeah, agreed.
So so if that's okay to say, let's just do annotations right now, that's the easiest thing to do implementation wise. So there's no wasted effort if we then later add annotation or add the config approach, then you can just modify the plugin later to pull from the config instead of the annotation. So it's not like we're writing a whole new feature that has to be rewritten from scratch. So I think doing the easy thing now and then migrating to the longer term solution, if we can agree on one, it's probably the fastest way to get this feature merged without wasting any effort. Oh yeah, Tiger also mentioned the other approach that we've done in plugins before is use config maps, but I think in that case the plugin has to basically publish, hey, create a config map with this name, and so that's another workaround basically. And again, it's not that config maps are ideal; it's that I need something more structured than annotations. So I tell the user in my documentation, create this config map, and we'll look here for configuration, and that's another thing that can be done. As well, and again, that would be without any explicit connections to the Velero, the spec.
Yeah, but again, you're kind of exposing the plugin.
Right, exactly. I mean, either way, you're exposing. I mean, you have to expose to the user what the plugin needs if the plugin needs that. I mean, the only way to completely hide plugin, everything the plugin does to the user is if you don't need any input from the user. And a lot of plugins are simple enough. Where you can get everything you need from the basic resources being saved and backed up, and from the backup. So if you don't need to expose anything to the user because you don't need to ask them for additional configuration, you're good. But if there are cases where there's plugin functionality that requires user configuration, right now you can either use annotations with a kind of well-known name that you publish, create this annotation with this name, the plugin looks for it, or config maps, create a config map with this name and the plugin will look for it. And I think if you can add explicit support eventually, and Velero, if we can come up with a design, in 1.12 or whatever that or some future release that we can agree that makes sense, then plugins can choose to migrate to this newer system. For that. But I think you're not really losing any effort by writing the plugin changes now that use one of these two mechanisms. Whether it's create a config map or look at annotations, and again, depending on how structured the data is and how many fields you need. But the config maps and the annotations both have that same risk of, you're essentially managing this completely outside of any API, and so the only thing you have anything resembling an API definition is basically your plugin documentation telling the user, hey, create this, and then we'll do, and then we'll read it.
Yeah, agreed. So maybe Daniel, if it's okay, do you want to maybe think more on this if it's making any sense to discuss with more people if it's not convincing enough for now? I mean, I understand we can decouple both designs for now. We can go with annotations and then do this later, but I kind of still want to see this plugin inputs get lit up because the second proposal as well, right? I'm planning to leverage the same field. I mean, anyways, we can skip it if we go the annotation route in the second PR as well. But I mean, I'm just trying to see if we can light this
Yeah.
up. Maybe take some time.
Another advantage to creating a separate design proposal for the plugin inputs is that then then people can look at their own plugins. I can look at the Red Hat plugins, and we can kind of add comments to that proposal, giving examples of use cases of currently existing plugins that need inputs, and we can kind of see whether this
Got it.
approach makes it easier or not, or whether it makes sense. Because we can kind of look at all the use cases. We've got the CSI use case here. We've got the existing change storage class use case, for example. This is a config map.
Right. Got it. So I'll create a different design for this as well. And this I will separate and say, like, we'll go with annotations for now so that at least this proposal can get checked in. And plugin inputs can be a stage 2 for this first proposal.
But you got my concern regarding exposing the implementation details, and you think that's okay, right?
Sorry, I didn't.
I expressed some concern regarding the plugin inputs because we are exposing this internal mechanism of Velero and some internal things. So from an API design point of view, I think we may expose, we maybe are exposing some irrelevant details to the user, because if user want to set a volume snapshot class, he just set it one way or another, but he doesn't need to know, oh, that's handled by a CSI plugin.
But when you put an annotation, it is kind of the same thing, right? Like your annotation will have something which says velero.io/CSI. So, I mean, it's just the word plugin might not be visible. It's the same exact thing.
I don't think so, because like I expressed, we may later, for example, change the name of the plugin, or move the plugin into some other mechanism. For example, we implement the CSI not using plugin, and I understand we need user input. We need to provide it one way or another. But I'm just at the moment right now, I'm not quite convinced that we need expose the detail of plugins to the user. I hope that makes sense. Because I'm thinking from API's perspective, we may want to make it more, scenario specific instead of implementation specific.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's just my thought at the moment. I got the idea, because you guys have a lot of different plugins which are not on the upstream, and you want some way to customize it. I'll think about it, but from the API perspective, I'm not sure if it's the right thing to do. We let user like put plugins name and the input this way in the spec.
Anyways, whenever they install Velero, they anyways give the plugin names to install, right? So I mean, it's the user is already exposed to all that information. I'm still not fully convinced what additional are we exposing to them. If they're installing a plugin, they're providing annotations for that same functionality. Then if they want an opt-in feature, it should be okay for them to put it in the CR, right? CR is still better than an annotation. Sorry, I disagree. I mean, we can. I don't need to debate here, but yeah, we can take this later.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So yeah, this was the first one. I mean, so for now, what I'll do is I split it into two. I'll create one for plugin inputs where folks can give their examples. And for this volume snapshot one, I'll go with the annotations route just for implementation. Is that okay, Daniel?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
So I was saying for the volume snapshot class proposal, I will remove the plugin inputs approach for now. I will put plugin inputs as a separate proposal that we can separately debate on. And for the volume snapshot class thing, I will go with the annotation route where you can provide.
I think that sounds okay to me. Yep.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good. And okay, now coming to the second proposal, this is around JSON substitutions. We discussed this in, I think, previous meeting as well. You had some concerns around using the RIA for JSON substitution. Your concern was that since this is an RIA, it will be triggered for each object. But I kind of had one point there. Maybe we can make certain code changes which kind of say that like if the customer has not opted to use this plugin, we will kind of leave it dormant. But if customer chooses to use it, then kind of this RIA will get triggered for each object. I think that should kind of address the performance issue or like triggering it for each customer if it's in the core Velero code.
I will say if you're using if it's an RIA, you can also use the there's the applies to function and the plugin. So
right.
You might be able to, depending on how the inputs are set up. So for example, if the inputs for this are a config map,
yep,
then the applies to because we do call the simplest way to handle applies to is if there's a way to configure, hey, I only want to apply this to, secrets, for example. If there's some way of providing that input, then the applies to plugin, the applies to method will return, based on the context, or again, we have to figure out the inputs angle, because most of the simpler plugins applies to is pretty simple. This is a plugin for pods. This is a plugin for, PVCs, or this is a generic plugin that applies to everything. For example, we had a plugin on the OpenShift side that initially we ran on everything because it was just some background. It set an annotation and did a couple of small things, but it turned out that was a performance problem to run on every single resource when we realized that we only actually needed it for certain resource types. So instead of applies to being returned to everything, we just provided a list of the 6 or 7 different resource types that it applied to. And so, if you had 1,000 secrets or whatever, then it wouldn't call on those. I think from a performance point of view, that is a valid concern. And we need to figure out with the, basically to utilize the applies to part of the API to limit it to only call on things that we actually want to substitute.
So how, what do you think? What do you guys think if we put that into the restore workflow? Like
that would be another approach that would work. I mean, the plugin approach is nice because someone can write it without needing to change the restore workflow. I think if this is generic enough, that's enough people want to use, this would make sense as a generic restore workflow, because if this is something, and again, I'm imagining, for example, again, say you have a config map and it's a map of resource type to some transformation struct, then the restore workflow could say, okay, based on resource, based on the GV, the group resource, we're looking at, okay, there is a matching substitution, or there's not, and if there's not, we skip it, and if there is, then we apply the substitution. So I think adding it to the restore workflow would make sense, especially if it's something that's
because I mean, after reading the PR, I kind of convinced that this is a relatively generic requirement, and many users may find it useful. So I think it probably makes sense to merge into the restore workflow, and we don't have the performance issue because you only load the config map once in that.
Right, you only load it once, and you only call it, when you need it. So if you have, if you're restoring 5,000 resources, and the particular types that have transformations are only 500 of those, then you're only calling this 1/10 at the time,
right?
And also you're not going through that RPC to get to the plugins.
And API slower.
So this is definitely something generic enough that I wouldn't be opposed to including this in the restore workflow. It would also give us some flexibility to figure out the right place to put it in the restore workflow. And for example, is this something I would imagine we'd want to put this near the end, after applying the other restore item actions, kind of before we actually do, kind of right before we do that create call. But that would be part of if we're going to redesign this as a restore workflow, that would be part of the design proposal as to where exactly we want to apply this. Do you want to apply it before plugins or after plugins? I think is the distinction point that makes a difference.
All right.
Got it. Thanks for this thought, folks. I mean, I think it makes sense. If that's okay, I'll modify the proposal in that way so that it's part of the restore flow. And
Yeah.
I hope we have consensus. Any other folks opposed to it, please let me know.
Yeah, I would also say, the majority of the logic here is going to be the same in terms of,
Yes.
the bulk of this is at some point you get a an unstructured item as an input. You take the JSON transformation and they have an output. That part's the same whether it's in a plugin or whether it's in the core. The difference is going to be how you call it, and how you structure it, and how you manage the input to it.
Okay. So if it's part of the core workflow, I think even in that case, you folks would be open to taking a config map reference as an input in the CR. Is that a valid assumption? Or because the plugin input was for this exact thing, right? Like
Right.
for this JSON substitution, how do you pass in the config map?
Right.
Velero core code should not have to rely on annotation. So
Right. Yeah, exactly. If it's in the core workflow, it would not be an annotation, and it wouldn't be using plugin inputs. It would probably. I think you would have a couple of options. You could take a config map, or you could just add a map, to the because just as a spec field, restore a spec field that is a string to whatever struct map. I mean, there's kind of depending on how you structure this.
okay. Yeah, that
It could
could
be a
actually
separate config map, or it
grow
could be
in
just a map that you
size.
add to the spec directly.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
has been a design that is merged regarding the resource filter policy we introduced in V version 1.11, which in the backup CR we reference a config map, and it has a lot of
Got it.
condition and define what it skips. I think you can. I'll give you that link and
Got it.
just
I'm
make.
aware of it.
Yeah.
Got it. I
Okay.
got it. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and there are some thoughts in terms of the versioning of the data structure. I think, yeah, that's something we may also think about in this. Yeah.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. That's it from my side, folks. For the first one, I kind of like ask Daniel once if he gets time, like take some time to have a look at plugin inputs once more, think through. But otherwise, I think I explained. I'll go with annotations for now and split the proposal. And second, I will explore the core workflow and update the proposal accordingly. Thanks a lot,
Thank you.
folks. Thank you for your time. Orin, you're on mute if you're saying something.
Yeah, double muted. Sorry. Scott, you're next. You want to?
Yes, sure. So the backup item action v2 controller work was merged. It's not completely done. We kind of agreed there were some things we wanted to fix and change, but we wanted to merge it because most of those changes wouldn't affect the restore item action follow-on work. So that way I can work on those two PRs in parallel, the follow-on PR, and I'm just gonna give a quick summary of what I'm intending to do in this. And I know there's a discussion item relating to this as well. So some of them were pretty straightforward, changing some of the names to be consistent, whether we include async versus not. The items to update field, we agreed that we're going to call it post-operation items. It's a little clearer on kind of the context and how it's used. There were some other kind of minor style issues to work through. Let's see. But the big thing is, the biggest thing I would say is kind of trying to kind of rationalize and minimize the differences between what happens in the finalize or resource and versus what happens the first time in the regular backup. So there were some exceptions I was making around hooks and volumes, and upon reading the feedback and looking back at the code, I think I can get rid of those. I think we can just make those the same. And they're most likely not going to be applying anyway, because those types are unlikely to be things that we're creating as part of an async plugin anyway. So it was really an edge case, even if we did need it. The bigger things, one was additional items we were ignoring. There was actually a good reason for that in the original PR. I realize now that that reason is gone. The first version of this, you might remember, where we actually went through, added all the items, backed everything up, and then in finalize, we did a second pass and updated an item that we backed up the first time. So when we were doing that, we didn't need to add additional items because we'd already added them. But now that the current design is, these new resources that are created by async plugins, if those add additional items, we haven't had an opportunity to add those. So we actually need to process additional items the same way and finalize as we do in the first version. So I think I do need to make that change. And the one other one, and this was the one where there was some more discussion around, which and Daniel has a topic here. We might as well just talk about it now because it's relevant to this comment. And the issue is in Finalize, we're now backing up things that were created as part of an async plugin. We're not expecting these async plugin created items to have their own async plugins on them because that results in the possibility, especially for badly written plugin, of an infinite loop of you go finalize, then back to waiting, finalize, waiting, and never finish it. So the current approach was to discard it, but that's kind of a problem, as you pointed out, because if you have a plugin that's doing this that shouldn't be doing this, the user needs to know this. So my thinking at the moment is that we do two things. First of all, we be proactive and document, don't do this. And the plugin example will actually check. I'm going to modify my plugin example to actually check the backup phase and not create an operation ID if it's if it's in Finalize. But also,
yeah, but Scott, sorry to interrupt, but there's a gap I want to point out because the plugin developer may I think it kind of difficult to find out it's in finalized state or not in the code.
Actually, it's not, because you pass in a backup reference, so you can just call backup.status that phase. It's already available.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that's actually pretty easy. The second thing we want to do, and this is going to be key for kind of, I mean, the point is that part is for plugin developers. For users, instead of discarding and ignoring operation ID, if we get an operation ID during Finalize, we need to log an error. So at least there'll be an error that shows up, and which will sort of suggest there's a bug somewhere that needs to be filed. So that was my thinking now, is to sort of kind of handle it on both ends. On one side, document and give examples to sort of show plugin developers how to avoid this from happening, and then actually log the error if it happens anyway.
Yeah. So another question is, do you want to run some integration test, automation test, for this updated workflow of backup?
Yeah, so at this point there aren't any end-to-end tests.
Okay.
We have, obviously the PR itself has unit tests, of course. Shubham, I'm actually not really sure what on our side. Do you know what our end-to-end testing plan is around this with Data Mover and the?
No, nothing as of now, but I can assure you that I've been using the V2 changes to create new plugin. So
yeah, I mean, there's two questions. There's obviously the does it work thing, but the other, I think the point behind the end-to-end test question is, is there going to be some way to make sure this is included in end-to-end testing at some level, so that when regressions, if we get a regression, we find it quickly.
Right.
Yeah, we could open up an issue for that maybe, so that the E2E gets implemented.
EDE in the VMware Velero repo, correct?
Yeah.
The one thing we need for an end-to-end test to get written is really to have not just the full functionality in place, but also that plugin example that uses it, which is the PR is out there, but again, it's still in basically that's going to be in progress until this stuff's done as well.
Yeah. Sorry, guys, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So we do need to find a way to get end-to-end testing included for this. I would agree. It's just that we haven't gotten to a point where it's practical to implement it yet, because we don't have a merged plugin example PR, and we really couldn't merge that plugin example PR until all of the required bits in the Velero repo were merged, because right now that PR is in draft state because it's pointing to the PR branch rather than main.
Okay, I have additional comment around that, because I know you guys are implementing some BIA v2 plugin to leverage this async operation framework. So do you guys plan to run automation using this concrete implementation of the plugin in addition to the plugin example?
Oh yeah, so Shubham, in terms of our own OADP and testing, are we going to have anything that includes the Data Mover with the async plugins implemented?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I think we already have one data mover test case, right, Wes? Correct me if
Yep.
I'm wrong.
No,
So
you're
we
right.
haven't
We're
we have
just
one using
waiting
the
to put it
old,
on master.
yeah, right, using the Fire
Yeah.
implementation. So it's a question of
Okay.
modifying that test to test the new
To use the
workflow.
async plugin. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I want to point out, maybe later we may make some change to that based on our understanding, but because we don't have any implementation of the BIV2 plugin with async operation. So if you guys have some automation tests, even if internally, I think that's helpful for us to discover the break change earlier.
We'll try and get it in both places.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, right. We in other words, the OADP one is going to include data mover and all that. Any end-to-end test that we have upstream, in the Velero repos is going to be focusing on just, I guess for now, until we have a Velero data mover that uses this, we'll need to use the example plugin. Because there's a way in the example plugin to trigger, the async side.
Yeah, just in case there's some possibility that the test passed in the plugin example, but break in.
Oh, exactly. No,
concrete.
absolutely. So on the Velero side, sorry, on the Red Hat side, we certainly will be, including that testing, because that's what we're delivering to customers. So we have to be testing that. Obviously, those that's going to require things that are not, explicitly in the Velero repos. So that test probably is, again, running in our environment, in the OpenShift repos. But at the same time, the example, the plugin example will test the APIs. Obviously, it doesn't test everything because, for example, the plugin example, what I'm doing to simulate this is you set an annotation on a resource to back it up, like with a duration, say 5 minutes, and we simulate an operation by creating just a secret with, and then the progress method in that API just compares the time. And when 5 minutes is up, it says it's done. And so this allows us to sort of test the controller workflow. But we test, making sure that the saved item in the tarball is latest updated, because every time we call progress, we also add an annotation that increments. So we're testing the work that, the backup workflow, making sure that the finalized works and all that. But it's not quite the same as a real world test where you're creating a CR and there's some external, controller working. And so obviously you need a real world plugin to get that level. But my plan then for these for the follow-on plugin is to get that, follow-on PR is to get that out the next couple of days. Most of those changes are relatively small, but renaming things is, the bulk, the code in the plugin is not going to be tiny, even though it's going to be a bunch of small changes together. The biggest ones are going to be around the finalized logic and making sure we're doing the additional items and all that. And in parallel to that, probably once that PR is out there and being reviewed, I'll be starting to work on the restore item action PR, which
I think Yonghui has started reviewing that draft PR.
And then I forgot to mention here in the status, but I have another PR that's already open on the restore side as well. That was the implementing in the controller that additional items ready field. So that's but the bigger restore PR is going to be implementing async action on the restore side, which that PR does not include.
Which sorry, we're just kind of running out of time. Just do we need to discuss the feature complete date of March 10th at all?
That's actually on the discussion topics already. Okay. So we can, if you want, we can talk about now, or we can wait till after status. I mean, it's listed there under the topics.
Yeah, I think we can discuss it now, and I will sign off. It's relatively late for me, so I think we need at least one more week. But
yeah, that's what I was suggesting.
But my only question is 1 week enough, Scott? What do you feel?
I think that depends on how quickly we can get the reviews done and whether new changes are needed. I kind of like the idea of slipping only a week now, with the idea being next Tuesday we can revisit it. rather than saying, let's slip 2 weeks now for sure, because
Okay.
I mean, my plan is to get all of my PRs submitted by the end of this week.
Yeah.
So if they can be reviewed and merged next week, we're still done. But obviously,
no, yeah. But we are not done. I want to point out, because after merge this BIA V2 PR, we noticed some break in our pipeline. So that we will need some time to handle that. And there are some ongoing development work from our side, and they need to
and there's
rebase
some other
due to the
PRs as
big
well. I
change.
know Emily has a PR that's still out.
Yeah.
So we may end up needing 2 weeks. I just don't know if it makes sense to, call it week by week or just say it's going to be 2. I mean, again,
yeah, I think it's okay. We decide to sleep 1 week, but we need to set the expectation that it's possible we delay 2 weeks, right?
I agree. I think 1 week is a possible. I think we can get it done with only 1 week delayed, but it's not a guarantee.
Because I'm having.
We need at least a week. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'm having a meeting with Pradeep tomorrow, so I want to set the expectation correct.
Okay. So I would suggest a 1 week 1 week delay with the possibility of needing a second week. We're just not sure yet.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's all my topic has been covered. I'm gonna sign off, guys.
Okay.
Bye, Daniel. Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Right. Next on the list, Shubham, you wanna have some PR reviewed? But
Yeah, no.
I
have been doing some PR reviews. No implementation updates from my side. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And Emily, do we have Emily with us?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep, I just need at least one more review on this PR. It is to address any hard-coded default timeouts that were in both backup and restore. So we decided to just use a server setting to cover all of them. And there have been some reviews on it, but I have updated it since and just need, like I said, another 1 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's already gone through the initial review process, and requested changes have been made as far as I know.
Yeah.
And I will, and I'll it looks like it was been updated since I last reviewed it, so I'll review that again today as well. I'll also point out that one of my open PRs depends on this getting merged before I can make it ready out of draft, because that the one I just mentioned on the restore side, involving the additional items being ready, that has a default timeout that's going to be this new resource timeout. So my PR will need to be modified to include that once this PR merges. So in that sense, this one's also on the critical path of not the async work, but there's one other PR that needs to be modified and reviewed again after this merges.
Okay. Great. Anyone else wants to add some updates, or okay, we're close to the hour. So discussion topics, I think Daniel left, so and that was primarily discussed. Okay, next one is Satya from Cloud Casa. Go ahead. I think we have you for first time in our call. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, Erlen, that is correct.
Okay, so
I've listened to a bunch of recordings, but never been on this call before.
Yeah, okay. So please take your time to introduce yourself, and then we can go through your topics.
Yeah, cool. Hey everyone, this is Satya. I run operations for Catalogic, and within Catalogic, we have a service that we run, Cloud Casa. As of now, it's a business unit within Catalogic, but we're actually looking to spin itself out into a separate company where Cloud Casa will become its own entity. We have been the benefactors of Velero for the last couple of years. We've used Velero for driving CSI snapshot feature in our product. We used our own implementation of data mover that uses the snapshot and pushes data to S3. S3 storage that we manage for customers, as well as customer managed S3 instances. So we delivered, we've been delivering a backup as a service solution on top of Velero, but it wasn't exactly compatible with Velero. So if somebody was already using Velero, that doesn't mean they'd be able to deliver, I mean, we'll be able to deliver any value to them. I just wanted to quickly kind of introduce to the maintainers that, we are introducing a service that would work on top of existing Velero installations as well, and will be completely compatible with Velero. So far, we were essentially being a replacement to Velero, where anytime you install a Cloud Casa agent, it would replace the functionalities that Velero is performing. And in this case, we would simply allow a user to come in and manage an existing Velero install without any disruption, right? They would continue to be able to run Velero, but they'd get management, monitoring, alerting, and cross-cloud recovery, guided recovery capabilities on top of Velero. Again, my motive today is simply to introduce that we're working on that service. So we hope to be more closely aligned and want to participate on these calls going forward. I think you're seeing some of our team members already take on a little bit of the burden around responding to Slack messages and Q&A questions in Velero, and I think we'll continue to do that. I think it's good practice for us as well as we add users that run Velero on our service. So we hope to contribute in that fashion as well. Alex, I know you were also looking for some collaboration around blogs and stuff around Velero, and happy to work with you on that.
That's the reason why I reach out to you offline, because I know you folks your service is based around Velero, so I find it like supernatural to invite you and to work on the project together, and you can benefit from that, and the project can benefit from your efforts. So I see it's kind of happening right now. So yeah.
So our goal is essentially, I think, to some extent, I mean, people are using Velero, but even after 50 million Docker pulls, you're still seeing very, very basic questions on the forum and Slack. And a lot of it just comes down to, lack of skill sets around Kubernetes in general. So our goal is just kind of democratize and kind of make this more accessible to folks that have done backups before. They're used to defining a backup job, setting up a policy, and everything through the UI. So we're simply trying to build that layer on top. We will have that functionality free for early adopters. About 5 clusters they can do with our service for absolutely free. No, nothing. But at some point, we would certainly be commercializing that feature set. But again, the goal is to kind of meet where the customers are. There is a lot of use around Velero, but we're also seeing that there are usability challenges that hopefully we can help address and reduce the number of messages and calls I think people are placing in this context.
Yeah, nice. And there's a Git remark in the chat from Tiger about the UI, because you practically a big portion of your service is a UI, which is user friendly, and for some folks, Velero console is not that super friendly. So do you plan to somehow work on this one with us, like to upstream some of the UI stuff that you've done?
Yeah, so a lot of what we are currently doing is built as a service first, but our plan to contribute back is to actually create a single server, single cluster UI, right? So it's essentially build a UI that works on a cluster level, that a user can see their CRDs and so on. So that would be our contribution back to the open source community. But the multi-cluster management and the multi-cloud credentials management, I think those we will deliver as a service for our the larger customers that will have plenty of clusters.
Yes. So the single cluster version will be something that you would create a basically an open source GitHub project for, with all the code there available, and then kind of develop a community around that.
Yes, Scott, that's the current plan. We're literally just getting the service off the grounds at this point. So it will only start with what we already have. And to be fair, because we were utilizing Velero for CSI snapshots, we were already creating CRDs and stuff in the backend. So we were deeply familiar with how to create the various components in Velero that's put into play to run a backup and restore. So we're now just essentially extending that to a customer that has already installed the Velero and have set up, the CRDs in the backend. As we get more familiar with it and keep going with it, I think part of our roadmap is to essentially help build this single cluster UI feature on top of Velero, and kind of and make that open source for anybody to try.
Nice. Whenever you're ready, ping me out. We can set up this one and create like a working group for this one, because it's like a separate effort from the core Velero stuff, in my opinion. And yeah.
Understood. We'll certainly do. Again, we're looking to go live with the service as it's currently planned at the upcoming KubeCon. So if anybody is there, would certainly love to demonstrate and showcase the feature as well. I mean, we can also do that on a future community call closer to the end of this month, if there is any interest in folks to see what we've done.
And I will be at KubeCon, so that'd be great to see that while I'm there.
Yeah,
sounds good, Scott. I'll reach out to you offline and let's set up some time.
Sure.
Yeah, it's I'm every time I'm like asking everyone, hey, drop me a line if you're at KubeCon. We can organize something. Actually, we spoke about with Wes a few times already, that we can do something unofficial Velero meeting over lunch or dinner or something like that, including your demonstrations, Satya. So it's gonna be super cool to meet everyone.
We have about 9 of our team members flying in. Certainly happy to kind of join you guys and plan with you together as well. And we'll help in creating the quorum.
Yeah, sounds nice. Thank you. Okay, welcome to the club then.
I just got one feedback. I sent you a message in Slack as well. I think there are multiple places where this community meeting Zoom link and schedules are there. I just wanted to at least communicate as a user that I've tried joining this call multiple times, and every time I would be wrong with either the Zoom link or the time slots. And it's never clear whether the meeting is happening in Beijing time zone or the US time zone. I think Scott mentioned in some chat message that what's in HackMD is actually incorrect. I expected it.
That's right. Yeah, we changed that a few months ago. The meeting time to sort of kind of, it was kind of set up in a confusing way with the first, second, third, fourth, Tuesdays, and it was just not working out for us. And so we changed. And the other problem was that the North American media was so late that no one in Beijing could ever join it. And we moved it earlier so that, Daniel was on today for a little bit. It's not convenient for him, but he can join if he needs to. And so that was the reason for the change. But we didn't quite, like I said, the schedule in the HackMD is wrong. And I believe I think the Slack reminders are correct, but the times
Yeah,
that get
yeah.
sent out are
times are wrong
off.
as well. I mean, last week I think I joined an hour late because of the
Oh,
EST
yeah,
EDT
that's that's the other issue, right? It's 8 p.m. when we're on daylight. Sorry, it's the China centric meeting is at 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern during daylight savings time, but it's 7 p.m. U.S. Eastern. So, for example, the next meeting will be at 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern, not 7 p.m. U.S. Eastern. I'm not sure what time zone you're in, but
yeah, East Coast.
okay, yeah. So next week it will be at 7 because sorry, at 8, not at 7, because we'll be back with daylight savings time. There's this confusion twice a year because Beijing doesn't change their time for daylight savings.
Understood.
So the offset is different for half the year because of that.
Yeah,
Because that meeting is
my
scheduled to
hope
be at
and
8 a.m. every time for them.
and feedback to Orlix is kind of community manager is, if it would be great if you can create those ICS invites. It'll be 2 invites, obviously, given that we're alternating. So this way it can get on people's calendar and so what I realized is if you join once, it becomes easy to follow along. But I think there is a significant barrier to joining the first time around. Just because of
I think once you join the Velero group in Google, you should be having them in your calendar. Are you part of, did you join the?
I am, but okay, I will double check and maybe I'm not seeing.
Or maybe they stopped like propagating for new users. Okay, I'll check this one and maybe I can, as you said, that's a good idea to export those and add them somewhere so people can import them.
Yeah, and the current setup is a lot easier to do that with the current schedule, just because it's it's every 2 weeks for the starting point, and so as long as the Beijing one is set to Beijing time, it'll adjust automatically for daylight savings for the rest of us. And obviously the US centric one.
Yeah, again, just some feedback, given that I tried to join the last couple of times and it was I felt very stupid, but that's also the point. That was my feedback.
We make it hard for the trustworthy. No, I'm kidding, but yeah, thank you for that. I'll fix that. The thing is, we have that in so many places that it's super easy to forget to update some of the places that
Got it. I think that Zoom link is also incorrect, by the way, in the HackMD, because that's where I clicked on
probably because HackMD is like the end point of joining the meeting. So I'll take notes and I'll fix that for sure.
Yeah, the Zoom link changed. I think sometime last summer. I know there's a while there was a while the invites had the wrong link, but that's been fixed. But it may be that the link from the HackMD.
Yeah, we switched the links when we created the new invites for the bi-weekly or every other week kind of schedule, and we removed this kind of awkward thing.
Yeah, and last feedback on this, I think even if the meeting notes at the bottom said what time zone it actually happened in, we would know that the next meeting would be alternating schedule. So even if you state here that the meeting happened in this particular time slot, we'd be able to guess when the next one is going to be. Given
that's a good point. Yeah, right now we have the date, but we don't have the time. So it's probably good to list in the date which it was. That's actually a good point.
Okay, that's all. And sorry to be high maintenance on the first call.
No, perfect. Thank you very much. And Wes, I think, did we touch on this one?
Yeah. We discussed that already before Daniel dropped. The consensus seemed to be we're definitely going to be calling for a 1-week slip, but recognizing that it might turn into a 2-week slip.
Let me add that. Is it? Where is it?
Yeah, and because I guess Daniel had a meeting tomorrow to discuss that further internally at VMware, but that's what we just because I know for a fact we need at least a week, because I've got 2 PRs to write this week that then have to be reviewed and merged. And if those get merged relatively quickly, then we may be good with 1 week, but maybe not. And then there's other people that have ongoing work as well.
Okay. Anyone else? wants to add something for today? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day and talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. See you all.